So thank you guys very much for joining me this morning. We will discuss how we can customize our SharePoint form using PowerApps. Sorry about that. There's a change in the name of the SharePoint conference. So the SharePoint conference is now called the Microsoft 365 Collaboration Conference. This will be held March 23rd to March 25th at the MGM Grand Resort in Las Vegas. Also, I want to take some time to thank all the generous sponsors that are making this event available. We are very grateful for it, and thank you guys very much. Please consider donating to the following charity. So there's International Medical Corp and also United Way. So there's 10% of the funds from the sponsors that go to support there. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Luc Labelle. I'm the CEO of Cabessa. Cabessa is a consulting firm located here in Montreal, Quebec, Canada. We do consulting and also training on most of the Office 365 stack with lately a big focus on the Power Platform. So lots of training on Power BI, lots of training on Power Automate, and also on Power Apps. Also doing some integrations from an Office 365 perspective. So I'm also a business applications MVP, which means that I try to do as many conferences as possible throughout the year. I'm also running the Montreal Business Application User Group here, where we meet about once a month, and we discuss the Power Platform, basically. So Power Virtual Agent, Power Automate, Power BI, and Power Apps. I'm also a Microsoft certified trainer, so I've been giving training for a few years now. I enjoy it very much. So I've set a few objectives for today's session. It's quite basic, actually. The first one is to understand how SharePoint Forms actually integrates with Power Apps. There's a few integration configuration that needs to be done, and once you understand how this is working, it's much easier to actually enhance or enable these features from a SharePoint perspective. Then we'll take an overview of the basic controls that are required for this integration. There are some controls that are required for this to work, and some of them are created for us, so we'll look into that. Then I'll show you how we can change the default SharePoint form. Because whenever we integrate Power Apps into, whenever we integrate, there you go, Power Apps into a SharePoint, this creates a default SharePoint form, and I will show you how we can customize this default form that is provided for us. And we'll also, if we have some time, discuss advanced customization scenarios. So when we choose to customize SharePoint form with Power Apps, a few things actually happen behind the scene, and we'll go over these. So the first thing is that the default form, the default SharePoint form, is actually changed to a custom form created and generated by Power Apps. Then PowerApps Studio is launched, and it is pre-configured with all the basic SharePoint integration that we need for this to work. So right off the bat, if you customize your SharePoint form with Power Apps and you just don't change anything, you save it, you publish it back like that, the form is now coming from Power Apps and it's working on its own. You have nothing else to do. This form is created in the default environment. So if you've been working with Power Apps for a little while, it's created in the default environment, and it is not listed as a Power App, as an individual or standalone Power Apps or a Canvas application. So you can't actually go back to this application from the Power Apps perspective. If you want to modify the form, you need to go back to the SharePoint site, go to the SharePoint list, and customize the form from the SharePoint lists. So how does this work? Basically, you just go to a SharePoint list, and there's a Customize with Power Apps button at the top, and then you can just go ahead and click on that button. When you do that, what happens behind the scene is that the Forms option in the form settings, in the list settings, are changed by default. So initially it's configured to use the default SharePoint form, but as soon as we click this customize with the Power Apps, customize the form with Power Apps, the settings is overwritten and it's changed to use a custom form created in the Power Apps instead. So as I was mentioning, a bunch of controls are pre-created for us so that the forms work right off the bat. The first control as created is the screen control. So whenever you create an application in the Power Apps, the first layer of control that is required is actually a screen. So you need a screen to put all your controls or your other controls on it. So in this case, we have one screen pre-created. It's called Form Screen 1. And basically, you can see that on this screen, the only controls that are available currently are the SharePoint Form 1. So there's a form just underneath it. It's called SharePoint Form 1. So if we look into that, you can see whenever I select that SharePoint Form 1 control on the right-hand side, the square has changed a little bit, and you can see all these rounds and all these dots around the form. So I've actually basically selected this specific control within the screen, and it's showing me all the fields that are available in that form. When we choose to customize the SharePoint form using Power Apps, this specific control, the SharePoint Form 1, it's actually just the name that it was given by default, but we could change that, no problem at all. But currently it's SharePoint Form 1. So for this form, the data source was pre-configured for us. So there's a data source property, and that data source property was automatically configured to point to the list that we were working with. In this case, the list I was working with was called Ignite Tour dash clients. So this is a demo that I did at the Ignite Tour, and that's the reason why this screenshot is showing this name, but we'll have a different one today. And there's also the onSuccess property that is being pre-configured for us. So it's saying that onSuccess reset the form SharePoint Form 1, which is the form that was created in the process, and also hide this form from the right-hand side. So whenever this is done, just reset the form so that all the fields are empty, and also hide it from the end user so that it goes back to that SharePoint list. There's also a third control, which is the most important one. It's the SharePoint integration control. And this is the main difference between a Canvas application and a customized form into in a SharePoint. It's that specific control. So that SharePoint integration control cannot be added later on. So if I were to go to create a Canvas application, I can't go and select add this SharePoint integration control and configure it the way I want it. To get this control, I need to go from SharePoint and then click Customize Form, and then from there, whenever it's opening in the Power Apps, it's showing me this control. So the first property that is pre-configured for us for that specific control is also the data source property. So in this case, if you look at it, it says data source is equal to Ignite Tour client. So it's basically connecting, it's saying that this should be connecting to the SharePoint list that we are currently customizing the form for. There's also the onCancel property that is pre-configured for us, and it's basically saying, you know what, reset this entire form. So someone came here, but they click cancel, strip everything down, and just go back to that SharePoint site. The onEdit is actually flipping the SharePoint Form 1 to edit mode, allowing me to input some content, put some text in the text box, or select the drop down. The onNew property is actually calling the new form and passing the SharePoint form as a parameter to make sure that all these controls are stripped down so that I can start inputting some new information in it. The save is actually submitting this entire form back to SharePoint. And the view is showing me this entire form with a view perspective only. So I can't modify it. So it's basically this entire control that is driving the behavior of the form that we have in that customized form. Good, so let's do a demo. Just want to make sure we have no questions. Yeah, so far so good. All right, so I have a SharePoint list, a basic SharePoint list, and I have a few columns, a name column, a country, a state or a province, a street address, a zip or a postal code. So if I am to add an item to this list, you can see that this is actually the default form that is provided with SharePoint. And I could say, you know what, this will be client one, and the country for that will be Canada. The province will be Quebec. The street address will be 123 Honest Street, and postal code, something like that. And I'm just going to go ahead and save this item back to my SharePoint list. So it's just a basic SharePoint scenario, SharePoint list, nothing fancy here. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to customize this default form to use a PowerApps form instead. And to do that, I will hit that PowerApps button, and I will customize forms in the PowerApps. So as I was saying, a few things are happening behind the scenes. So it's pre-configuring these controls in the PowerApps. Also, it's telling that SharePoint list to stop using that the default SharePoint, the default form that is provided with SharePoint, and to use that brand new form that will be created in the PowerApps. This shouldn't take too long. We're about there. See, all the controls are created. Sounds good. So as I was saying, a few controls have been pre-created for us. The first control that is selected is by default is that form that was created for us. So you can see that the form is selected because we have all these little dots around it. And also I can see all the fields that are available for that specific form. In this case, I don't want my form to show the attachments. I don't want people to be able to add attachments. Obviously, I could have configured that onto the list level, but in this case, what I want is just to remove the form, that field. So I can actually just change the look and feel of that form. We'll look into that later on when we personalize this, but I just wanted to show you how quickly I could add or remove fields on there. The next thing we could look into is the screen control. So the screen control also has a bunch of properties. There's a property called fill. So I could technically change the background color for this. Also, if I go back to my SharePoint form, I don't want the title and the name to be right at the top. So I'm just going to remove some space here so that, you know, it's not too packed at the top. Obviously, I could restructure this, but I'm just going to keep it like that for now. And then from a SharePoint form integration perspective, from that controls perspective, as I was saying, there's a bunch of configurations that were done. So the data source is pointing to that demo clients M365 list that I was into. The on cancel is resetting that that form right here. So if I were to rename that, the cancel for that control would actually point to the new name of that form, obviously. Then if I look onto the edit, it's switching the form into edit mode. On new, switching the form to new insert mode. Save is allowing me to save to submit this entire form, and the cancel will actually the cancel form will actually start just cancel this form and go back to the SharePoint list. I'm sorry, there was some things going on in the chat here, so I got a bit distracted for a second. Good. So what I could do next is just go and save this form as it is. And then I could go ahead and publish this to SharePoint. But what I want to show you first before I publish this to SharePoint is the see all versions. So I'm going to open the see all versions tab, and it's going to show me all the versions of that form that I went through. This is something that we usually, we usually get from the PowerApps perspective when we go and select an app and we go app settings, and then there's a bunch of settings for this application. So you can see that I have some information regarding the details, regarding the versions that is currently the last one or the current version that is available. Also the connections that might be used for that specific form. Also the flows that might be attached to it and stuff like that. The point I was trying to make with this is that if I were to go into my apps menu from a PowerApps perspective, you can see that I have this list showing here. And the reason for that is just because I came from the SharePoint perspective. If I were to refresh this list, you see that the application is not showing there anymore. It's not showing as a standalone application. You really need to go through the SharePoint configuration to get to these settings. So I'm just going to kill that, and then I'm going to publish this to SharePoint. And then if I go back here, it's telling me I want to go back to SharePoint. I'll say yes, why not? This will take me back to SharePoint, and it takes me back to my demo client M365 list. If I click new, notice now that this form has been customized using PowerApps. So this is a PowerApp application loading in that panel now. So if I just show to you that this is still working, client 2, country Canada, oops, sorry about that, Quebec, 1, 2, 3 on a street. Actually, yeah, keep it like that. And different postal code. And I could go ahead and save this. If I were to go back to the first client that was created in that list, it is also pulling that new personalized list. And if I click, and right now I can't edit that because on the view, it's calling the form in edit view. And whenever I click edit all, this is calling the on change event, and the on change event is showing me the form in edit mode. So I could say country was updated and then save this back to my SharePoint list. Cool. So the next thing I want to talk about is that most of the time we need to customize the SharePoint form that we want to work with. So there's very little added value for us to just customize the SharePoint list as it is and leave it as is. There's often we need to implement some branding in there. Also, you know, the colors, the logo of the company, any branding components basically. Also, changes are we might need to implement some business logic in there. So whenever a field is selected, show or hide this segment of the form, and so on and so on. So the next thing we're going to do is we will create a multi-tab form in the SharePoint, and yeah, I will show you how to do that. So let me first show you what the final result will look like. So we will use a basic SharePoint list with a bunch of fields. So if we were to look into this, I have a project name, a client name, a country, a state or a province, a street address, a postal or a zip code, contact name, contact email address, contact phone number, the type of project that is actually a choice. So this could be like, I don't know, a SharePoint project or a Power Platform project, and so on and so on. Then we have the project amount, which is a currency. Then we have a project start date, which is a date and time. Then the contract type is a choice column again, and there's a bit of business logic that need to be implemented there. So if the contract type is a standard contract, do nothing. But if it's a non-standard contract, I want you to justify why this is not a standard contract that we use. And then we have a justification, as I was saying, that needs to be provided. The contract type is non-standard, and there's also the status of that request. So basically what that list does is quite a simple list. It's supporting the process of approval for a price before a contract can be submitted to the client. So the way this goes is that before a contract can be submitted to the client, the rep has to go through some kind of an approval process. So it needs to fill the form to say, this is the project that I'll be working with. This is where the client is located. This is the amount of project. This is where when this project will close. And I'm estimating this to be like 10 grand. And so can you please approve this price before I send this information to legal so that they can create the contract, and so I can send the contract to the client. It's just a simple scenario that we're supporting. So if I'm going to add a new item here, you can see that this is a custom form that was pulled from PowerApps, and there's also the concept of tabs in there. So everything that is project related is sitting on one tab, and everything that is client related is sitting onto another tab. So if I were to go and click, this is a project for, project 3. It's going to be 5 grand. The project start date is going to be by the end of the month. It's a SharePoint type of project. The representative name here will be me. And the contract type will be a non-standard contract. And so show me that justification panel at the bottom. So this is my justification. Then go and fill up the client name. The country, in this case, is a drop-down. The province is text. Then this will be 567 on same street. Then postal code. Contact name would be John. Contact email would be John. Sorry about that. Client3.com. And phone number 514-333-4444. And then if I save this saves back to my SharePoint list. So I'll show you how we can do this. So I've prepared an empty list with the exact same structure that I just showed you. If I look at the list settings, we have the exact same fields. It's the exact same type of list. It's just that there's no items in it, and this list hasn't been personalized from the forms perspective. So if I add an item, you can see that all the fields are actually coming from the SharePoint form. So if I go and say, client 1, actually it's going to be project 1 for the client. I'm sorry about that. For the client 1 in Canada, Quebec, 123 on a street, Ash, contact name will be Steve, contact email will be Steve at client1.com. Phone number will be 514-111-2222. The project type in this case will be a business intelligence project. The amount for that will be 25 grand. The project start date should be next Monday. And then the contract type in this case is a standard, but see how this is not working well for us because the justification is showing regardless. Also, the other thing is kind of odd is that I can see the status of the request that I'm doing. So if I were to drive the status of this request using Power Automate, it'd be easy for me to say, this has been approved by CEO. And so just go ahead, send this to legal and create the project. So obviously we don't want this status to be showing here. Representative name will still be me in this case. So obviously this is just a basic SharePoint form I can add to my SharePoint list, no problem at all. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go and customize this using PowerApps. Again, the same thing is happening behind the scene, creating all these controls, configuring all these controls for us, and then telling that SharePoint list to stop using the default SharePoint form and to connect to that application instead. So basically, same thing happened as last time, but notice how all the fields are not showing in our form. So basically what it did, it integrated a bunch of fields and it was like, okay, I'm running out of space. And so I'm assuming this is good enough for you. So I'm just going to stop adding controls onto this form. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and add the missing fields. So we already have project name, client name, country, state or province, street address, postal code, contact name, and contact email. So we're missing a few. So if I were to say, you know what, I also need my contract type. I also need my justification. I also need my project amount, my project start date, the type of project, the rep who will be assigned to that. The status we said we were not going to put because we don't want the people to be able to change the status. We will drive the status through an approval process using Power Automate later on. Well, not today because it's not, we can't fit everything into one demo, but technically this is how we would do it in real life. And so status will leave out for now and just go ahead and add this. So what's going to happen is going to have this scroll bar where I have all these fields. Obviously, this is not very fancy at the moment. So the next thing that we could do is, rearrange that form a little bit so that it looks a little bit better. So the first thing we could do is, from a settings perspective, change the orientation of the form and make it a landscape form. So instead of being very narrow, it would be a larger form. And also in this case, I don't need it to be a tall and narrow. I just need to tall and large. I just need large and small. So I'm just going to make it smaller. I'm going to apply these change. And if I come back, you see now that my form has changed a little bit. So I guess the next thing that we could do is, from a screen perspective, change the back color of that screen. So maybe what we could do is select that specific color and say, you know what, I will customize this because I find this a little too dark. I'm just going to make it a little lighter. Then the next thing we could do is insert a header at the top of our form. So I'm going to add a label here, put this at the top, make it go all the way through. And I could say, welcome, space, and then I will concatenate the dat string, the user, and I want to use the user's full name. So this is connecting to the Office 365 connector, and it's pulling that current user full name for us. So it's you can see that it's saying welcome Luc Labelle. Obviously, I could make this a bit bigger, make it a 14. I just want to make sure that it's a normal type of font, so not bold or semi-bold. I'm just going to leave it like that. Now, the next thing I want is for this to be a different color than my current form, so that it looks like a header. So I could change that fill, sorry, that fill property, flip it to a standard type of color, and select a white background. The next thing I could do is change the color property to a custom property and choose, oh, sorry about that, and choose the actual red, green, blue value that I want for this control. So in this case, just going to choose a color that fits with my branding. The next thing we might want to do is that you can notice that the text is all the way down to the left, so it does not look very appealing. So what we could do is add some padding to that text to make it fit a little better. So selecting that label control, I could in the right panel here, choose the padding section, and on the left side, I want to add some padding, maybe like a 30 or something like that. That looks better already. So maybe I'm just a bit too big. I'm just gonna leave it like that. The next thing I could do is maybe add a logo for my company's logo in there. So I'm going to insert from the media menu an image. This image is not connected to anything at the moment, so I'm going to go ahead and say, you know what, I'm going to add an image to that project. I'm going to browse an image that's on my my computer. This will import the image in the media gallery for that specific project. And I can just resize this and bring it back here at the top. So I'm starting to have some kind of a layout going on here. So the next thing I want to do is add these buttons going on. So whenever I click on a button, something happens. Whenever I click on another button, something else happens. So if I were to click on my SharePoint form, I'm going to make a little bit of room here for these buttons. And I'm going to add from the Insert tab a button. And I will call this project. Actually, just change the text on it. And I will make this another one here. It's called client. Well, it's not called client. I'm just changing the text on it. Sounds good. So the way we will drive the behavior or the controls showing or disappearing is that there's a property called visible, and this for every control. And this property is a Boolean type of property. So you're saying visible is true or false. So it's either showing or not showing. So what we'll do is we will drive these properties using variables. So we'll set variables. So whenever someone clicks on the project, we will set the variable for the project to true. And so all the controls that are attached to this variable will show, as opposed to the ones that are not showing. So what we'll do is we'll set two variables, one for client and one for project. So whenever I select this button, when I click on it, what I really want to happen is to set a variable. So obviously, in this case, because I don't have multiple screens or multiple screens, I don't need to use a global variable. But since it doesn't change that much and it's easier to just set a global variable, I'm just going to use a set as opposed to update context. So I'm going to set my variable. I'm going to call that variable to global, and I'm going to call it project. And I'm going to set it to true. The next thing I'm going to do is the exact same thing, but for global client, and I'm going to set this to false. So when I click on project, make project true, make clients false. Going to do the exact same thing for the false button, but we're going to inverse the behavior. Sounds good. So the next thing we could do is drive the color of these buttons based on what's been selected or not selected. So if I go back to my home and I say the fill color for that will be a custom fill color, and it'll be so the fill color should be this one only if the button was selected. If it's not selected, I want it to be lighter. So what I'll do is if my global project variable is equal to true, so basically if make the button this color, otherwise make it lighter. So I'll use the color fade function, push the exact same color in my color fade and say, you know what, make it 50% of that. Sounds good. So the reason why it's showing by default as a lighter blue is because I haven't run this application yet. So the variable was never set to client and or project. So I'll do the exact same thing for my second button, which is the client button. And for the fill property, I will say if my client is selected, then choose the adequate blue, otherwise fade it. So if I'm going to run this and I click on the project, you see that my project is darker. If I click on client now, client is darker. So it'll give the appearance of flipping from one tab to another. Obviously, I could drive the entire colors of that screen to match whatever layout or look and feel I want to implement. But for today, I think this is going to be different. It's going to be we'll be able to show what we want with just these configurations. So the next thing we want to do is to bind the fields to these buttons. Whenever I click on a button, either show or don't show. So as I was saying, project name obviously belongs to the project tab. So as I was saying, there's a visible property for every control. By default, this visible property is set to true. And so what we'll do is we'll attach this Boolean data type, or this property. We'll attach this to the global, project. So whenever the project is set to true, show, otherwise don't show. And we'll do the same for client name. So client name should be attached to, GLB client, right? So if client is set to true, show, otherwise don't show. And I'll do the exact same thing with every data card that is available in this form. So I'm just gonna go and set all of these one by one to the adequate value. I can't multi-select all of these and just say, you know what, this is equal to this value in the context of locked data cards. So because we're customizing a SharePoint form, all of these components have been embedded into data cards and they're locked currently, and that's the reason why I can't multi-select them. So I'm just going to do them one by one. So state or province is also, oh, sorry about that. State or province is also attached to the client. Street address will also be attached to the client. Same goes for zip or postal code. Contact name goes to client. Contact email goes to client. Contract type is not client, this is project. So this will be GLB attached to project. Justification is also attached to the project. Project amount, obviously project. Project start date. Project, type of project as well. And representative name for the project should also be attached to this. So if I were to run my application as it is right now, if I flip from one to another, you can see that it's already starting to look a little bit like a multi-tab form. The next thing I want to do is actually redistribute these controls so that it looks a little bit more appealing for the end user when they work with it. So to do this, I will select my form, and you'll notice that I can't actually by default just change this around. And the reason for that is there's a property here for that entire form called snap to columns. And for now it's set to on. And because it's set to on, it won't allow me to move these things around the way I want to. So then the first thing I'm going to do is disable that property. So this would allow me, oops, sorry, go at the top and say, you know what, I'm going to make that project name a little smaller. I'm going to grab this project amount and specifically mouse over that little dark area where it says card project amount, and notice how my cursor, the cursor of my mouse changes, and click on this and drag and drop specifically in that gray rectangle at the top. Otherwise it won't move. This is the only way to move these around. So I'm just going to move that project name here, make that project amount maybe a little smaller, maybe stretch this a little bit, and then we will have a project start date. Then we should have a project type. And also a representative name for this. Sounds good. So this is aligned. Then my contract type, actually I'm going to put this here. and put my representative name at the bottom. Sorry about that. It will allow me. So I'm just going to leave it like that for now. Gotta make this. Why can't I just move this? There you go. Just gonna leave it like that. But I could. It takes some time, but sometimes you have to work with it a little bit. And then because I don't want to lose too much time, we're just gonna leave it like that for now. What I could do is make the contract type, just a little longer so that it looks, a little more normal in terms of form. I'll make the justification a little bigger, and also stretch that text area and flip it to from a single line to a multiple line here, so that I can insert multiple lines in here. And then I could go to the client tab and restructure my client tab as well. So I can move my country here, state or province as well. Make this a little smaller. It's easier to I find it easier in this case when we work with form, it's just to put the controls where we want them and then just resize them so that it looks good. So contact name and contact email could go on the same list, So client name could be a little bigger. Then the country for that, and the state or the province. Make this a little bigger. Oops, sorry about that. I'll leave this as it. Actually, I'll make this all the way here. Make this half of the size, and use this for the rest of it. Sounds good. So, oh, sorry about that. So I'm having this multi-tab look like behavior. Obviously, this is not a multi-tab form. It's the same form. I'm just showing and hiding controls as required. I'm just going to make this a little bigger. Yeah, sorry about that. Then the last thing that we need to do is to hide that justification panel based on the behavior of the contract type. So if the contract type is a non-standard contract, this control should not be visible. So we will attach the visible property behavior of visible property of the justification control to the behavior of another control. So that specific control is this data card value. So I'll go grab, obviously I should rename this adequately, but right now it's called data card value 9. And so whenever this data card value 9 is equal to non-standard, I want the justification to be showing. But what happened is that we are already driving the behavior of the justification panel with these buttons at the top. So this is kind of a two possible ways to come from. So this visible will be this control will be visible if my control dot selected dot value is equal to non-standard. So if it's equal to non-standard, make sure that I'm in the project tab, otherwise don't show. And if I'm not in the project tab and this is not selected, just don't show. I'm doing something unsupported apparently. Let me redo that. So the visible function here should be if I'm just going to repaste this entirely actually, because this should work. I think I'm just not using the adequate control. go? Yeah, I'm just gonna leave it like that for now because, you know, for demo purposes, I'm just gonna keep going. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna go ahead and save this. And then publish just a SharePoint. Then if I come back here, I could go back to my SharePoint site. This will take me back to my SharePoint where I was working. And if I click new, this should pull this new application or this new customized form. There you go. I should have actually on visible of this form drive the behavior of these buttons already. So whenever I click on project on new, so if I were to select this, technically non-standard should show this, and standard should disable that. Should make it non-visible. But you know, I don't want to lose too much time. But obviously, it's just, you know, that settings on the visible that you say, you know, it's visible only if the data card is selected to non-standard. Cool. So this is pretty much what I wanted to show, or the time that we had to look at things today. So if you are ready for the raffle, we're giving away three Oculus all in one. So something to look at. Thank you so much for joining me on this session. I'm not sure which time zone you guys are at. For me, it's 7 o'clock in the morning, well, 7:50. So I'm not sure where you guys are located, but thank you so much for attending the session. I appreciate it very much. I'm very, very grateful. Please provide some feedback on the session so that, you know, I can make it better and hopefully get better as well on my presenting skills. That's all I had for now. So I'm just gonna see if there are questions, and I think I will have to allow. I can't hear you. Oh, that's not me. Can you show how to unlock the modification again? So I have Caroline. Oh, yes, yeah. So the question was, how do I make the form? How can I change my controls from one area to the other within the form? There's a property called snap to columns, and this is where I'm doing this. While this is loading, I'll see if I have other questions. So I will publish this. There's another one that says, hi, I noticed that you don't have a submit button on the form. I don't need one in this context because the save button from the SharePoint, this will be my submit button. Obviously, I could have one though. I could create my save, edit, cancel, delete, whatever I want into my form, and actually embed this form into another page if I wanted to. But currently, it's pulling the SharePoint save, edit, and cancel option. That's why we add this control. Whenever I save from the SharePoint button, it's telling this form what to do, basically. So the first question was, how do I unlock this? So the snap to columns option, you need to set this up to be able to drag and drop your things around. And then these are all the questions that we had, I think, that were related to my session. So again, thank you very much. If you have any questions or you need to reach out to me, you can reach out to me using my Twitter handle. And that's all. Thank you very much.